My name is Natalie Quinn, and this is the story of how I turned corporate betrayal into the sweetest revenge imaginable. He looked at me like I was a fresh doormat under the office entrance he'd just stolen. A week later, I stood at his doorstep, not with an apology, but with the biggest client he'd ever dreamed of keeping. The fluorescent lights of Mason and Ridge Consulting had witnessed my rise over 9 years. 9 years of building relationships, nurturing accounts, and turning this mid-tier Chicago consulting firm into something that actually mattered in the logistics industry. My crown jewel, Sterling Global Logistics, a $90 million account that I'd cultivated from a skeptical cold call into our most profitable partnership. I should have seen Travis Holt coming from a mile away. He swept into our offices on a humid Tuesday morning in June. All startup swagger and empty buzzwords: disruption, synergy, paradigm shift. His vocabulary was a bingo card of corporate nonsense that somehow hypnotized our aging executive team. Natalie, meet Travis. Richard Marks, our CEO, had said with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for announcing record profits, he's going to be heading up our new Strategic Innovation Division. Strategic Innovation Division. 3 words that meant absolutely nothing but sounded impressive enough to justify whatever power grab was coming. Travis extended his hand, his grip unnecessarily firm, his smile practiced to perfection. "Heard amazing things about your work with Sterling," he said, his eyes already calculating. "Can't wait to collaborate." Collaborate? In corporate speak, that's code for figure out what you know so I can replace you. The erosion started subtly. First, it was the meeting invitations that mysteriously disappeared from my calendar. "Oh, didn't you get the update?" Travis would say with mock concern. We moved the Sterling quarterly review to accommodate their new schedule. Of course, there was no new schedule, just a new gatekeeper. I maintained my composure, continued my work, kept my client relationships warm through personal channels. Olivia Bennett, Sterling's chief operating officer, had become more than just a business contact over the years. We understood each other in that unspoken way. Successful women in corporate America often do. Both of us swimming upstream in rivers that preferred we drown. Something feels off about this Travis character. Olivia mentioned during one of our coffee meetings that I'd deliberately scheduled outside the office. He keeps pushing these dashboard solutions that would essentially eliminate human oversight. He's modernizing, I said carefully, knowing every word could potentially make its way back to the office. Olivia's laugh was sharp. Is that what we're calling it now? 3 months into Travis's tenure, the real games began. My proposals started getting revised before client presentations. My strategies were repackaged with his name prominently displayed. The Sterling account, which I'd managed single-handedly for 7 years, suddenly required team oversight. It's nothing personal, Travis assured me after a particularly humiliating meeting where he'd presented my 5-year growth strategy as his own vision. We're just aligning with best practices. You understand? I understood perfectly. I understood that he'd identified me as the biggest threat to his ascension. I understood that my relationships, my expertise, my very presence reminded everyone that he was an outsider playing dress-up in a consultant suit. Most importantly, I understood that in corporate warfare, the first casualty is usually the person who built what everyone else wants to steal. So I started building something else entirely. Late at night, after the office had emptied and the cleaning crew had finished their rounds, I'd sit at my desk with my personal laptop, carefully constructing the framework for Harbor Point strategies. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would trigger non-compete clauses, just a simple LLC filing, a basic business structure, a website that remained password-protected and invisible to search engines. During the day, I played the part of the diminishing senior strategist, gracefully accepting my shrinking responsibilities with a smile that never quite reached my eyes. I documented everything, every email where Travis claimed credit for my work, every meeting where he undermined my authority, every instance where he accidentally excluded me from critical discussions. You're being paranoid, my colleague Janet said over drinks one evening. Travis is just enthusiastic. 2 weeks later, Janet was let go. Redundancy. they called it. Travis had convinced leadership that her entire department could be replaced with automated reporting tools. That's when I started my real recruitment. Not for Harbor Point, not yet, but for something more valuable: information. Every person Travis had steamrolled, every employee he'd dismissed as not aligned with our innovative culture. They all had stories. More importantly, they had evidence. Jared Mitchell, our former head of analytics, was particularly helpful. Travis had fired him after Jared questioned the accuracy of some financial projections. "He's been cooking the books," Jared told me over encrypted messages. "Nothing prosecutable, but definitely enough to show a pattern of deception." I filed everything away, building my case like a prosecutor preparing for trial. But I wasn't planning to sue. Legal battles are messy, public, and rarely satisfying. I had something much more elegant in mind. The choreography of my downfall was almost beautiful in its predictability. Travis had been slowly poisoning the well, dripping concerns about my resistance to change and outdated methodologies into Richard's ear. When the Monday morning summons came, I was ready. The conference room smelled of fresh coffee and impending termination. Richard sat at the head of the table, trying to look stern but mostly appearing uncomfortable. Travis lounged in his chair with the satisfied air of a cat who'd finally caught the canary. Helen from HR clutched her folder of paperwork like a life preserver. "Natalie," Richard began, "we need to discuss your future with Mason and Ridge." I let him fumble through the speech. Something about new directions and mutual benefit and generous severance package. Travis occasionally interjected with false sympathy, each word dripping with barely concealed triumph. When they finally pushed the termination agreement across the table, I signed it without reading. They'd expected resistance, maybe tears, certainly questions. My calm acceptance threw them off balance. "When do you need me to clear out?" I asked, my voice steady as granite. "End of day would be fine," Helen squeaked. I stood, smoothed my skirt, and looked directly at Travis. "Good luck with Sterling. You'll need it." His smirk faltered for just a moment. Perfect. I packed my desk methodically, aware of the eyes watching from behind cubicle walls. 9 years condensed into a single banker's box. I left the awards, the certificates of appreciation, the photos from company retreats. Those belonged to a different version of me, one who believed loyalty was a two-way street. My phone buzzed as I reached my car. Olivia. "Heard the news. Lunch?" We met at a quiet restaurant downtown, the kind where deals are made over white tablecloths and discretion is part of the bill. "So," Olivia said, cutting straight to the point as always, "you're free?" "As of 45 minutes ago." She leaned back, studying me with those sharp gray eyes that had built Sterling into a logistics empire. "Travis has been bombarding me with proposals for a new integrated management system. Says it'll revolutionize our operations. And? It's garbage. Expensive garbage that would require us to fire half our team and trust critical operations to algorithms he doesn't understand." She paused, swirling her wine. "I'm done with Mason and Ridge." I pulled out my laptop, my hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. What if I told you there was another option? The presentation I showed her wasn't just a pitch, it was a promise. Harbor Point Strategies would be everything Mason and Ridge pretended to be: innovative without sacrificing intelligence, efficient without eliminating humanity, profitable without preying on clients' trust. "You've been planning this," Olivia said, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Planning suggests I intended to leave. Let's say I was preparing for contingencies. How soon can you be operational? How soon do you need me to be?" We shook hands over dessert, the deal sealed with chocolate soufflé and mutual understanding. Sterling Global Logistics would be Harbor Point's founding client, bringing with them not just revenue, but credibility. The next 3 weeks were a blur of activity. I worked 18-hour days, fueled by determination and the occasional vindictive fantasy about Travis's face when he learned the news. Jared joined me first, bringing with him not just analytical expertise, but a treasure trove of documentation about Travis's questionable practices. You know he's been billing Sterling for hours that don't exist? Jared showed me the spreadsheets, highlighting discrepancies with the enthusiasm of a detective solving a cold case. Save everything, I told him. We might need it later. Other refugees from Travis's purge trickled in. Sarah, a brilliant strategist he'd dismissed for lack of innovation. Translation, she'd questioned his methods. Marcus, a project manager whose crime had been maintaining strong client relationships that threatened Travis's control. Even Helen from HR reached out, privately, to share her concerns about the suspicious pattern of terminations. We didn't need their information immediately, but in corporate warfare, ammunition is everything. The announcement of Sterling's departure from Mason and Ridge came on a Thursday morning, delivered via formal letter to Richard Marks. I knew the exact moment it arrived because my phone started buzzing with texts from former colleagues still trapped inside. Emergency all-hands meeting. Richard looks like he's having a stroke. Travis is screaming at someone on the phone. I allowed myself one moment of pure satisfaction before returning to work. There would be time for celebration later. The call from Richard came that afternoon. Natalie, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Has there? I kept my voice neutral, professional. The same tone I'd used for 9 years while building his company's reputation. Sterling is, they're saying they're following you to some new firm? Harbor Point Strategies. And they're not following me, Richard. They're choosing to work with a company that values their business. This is highly irregular. There could be legal implications. I've reviewed my contract thoroughly. No non-compete clause, no non-solicitation agreement. Your lawyers were quite specific about keeping costs down when I was hired, remember? The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Travis says you've been planning this for months. Says you sabotaged. Travis says a lot of things. How many of them have proven true? More silence. Then, quieter. What would it take to bring you back? There's not enough money in your budget to buy back trust. Richard, goodbye. I hung up and immediately blocked his number. Some bridges deserve to burn. The real avalanche began the following week. Sterling's departure had sent shockwaves through Mason and Ridge's client base. My phone rang constantly. Other logistics companies, manufacturing firms, even some tech startups who'd heard about our more sensible approach to innovation. Is it true you're not trying to replace everyone with AI? One CEO asked, half joking but mostly hopeful. We believe in using technology to enhance human capability, not eliminate it, I replied, and listened to his audible sigh of relief. Each new client felt like another nail in Travis's coffin, but I wasn't satisfied with metaphorical burial. I wanted him to understand, viscerally, what it felt like to watch your work disappear. The opportunity came sooner than expected. Mason and Ridge was hemorrhaging clients, and their board demanded answers. According to my sources, former colleagues who'd wisely maintained personal email accounts, Travis was scrambling to explain how he'd lost their biggest account within 6 months of taking control. His solution was predictably pathetic. Blame everyone else. He accused me of corporate espionage, of stealing proprietary information, of violating ethical guidelines that he himself had shredded months ago. That's when I played my final card. I compiled everything, the falsified billing records Jared had documented, the recorded meetings where Travis had explicitly discussed deceiving clients, the emails where he'd taken credit for others' work, the trail of wrongful terminations that painted a clear picture of systematic abuse. I didn't send it to Richard. He'd chosen his side and could live with the consequences. Instead, I sent it to the board of directors, copying Mason and Ridge's biggest remaining clients on the email. The subject line was simple: transparency in transition, what your consulting firm isn't telling you. The massacre was swift and brutal. Travis was escorted out by security on a Tuesday. The same day of the week he'd arrived with such fanfare. Richard followed a month later, his resignation framed as pursuing other opportunities, but understood by everyone as the price of catastrophic judgment. Mason and Ridge survived barely, diminished to a shadow of its former influence. They still send me holiday cards, presumably out of habit or perhaps as some form of corporate Stockholm syndrome. Meanwhile, Harbor Point strategies thrived. We occupied the ecological niche Mason and Ridge had abandoned, the space where competence mattered more than buzzwords, where relationships trumped algorithms, where building something sustainable was worth more than quick profits. 6 months after my termination, I found myself back in the building that had housed Mason and Ridge. Not for nostalgia, but for business. We were meeting with a potential client who'd taken over their old conference room space. The elevator ride felt different this time. 9 years ago, I'd ridden these same elevators as an eager young strategist, believing that hard work and loyalty would be rewarded. Now I understood that in corporate America, you don't get what you deserve. You get what you negotiate, what you build, what you're willing to fight for. The meeting went well. Of course it did. We'd done our homework, prepared thoroughly, offered solutions that actually solved problems rather than creating new ones. As we shook hands and exchanged pleasantries, I noticed something that made me pause. Travis's old office, the corner suite he'd claimed with such pride, was being used for storage. Boxes of old files, outdated equipment, the detritus of corporate ambition, all piled where his desk once stood. "Something wrong?" Olivia asked, noticing my distraction. "No," I said, turning away from the past. "Everything's exactly right." That evening, I sat in my own office, not a corner suite, but a space I'd chosen and designed myself. The city lights sparkled beyond my window, each one representing potential, opportunity, the chance to build something meaningful. My phone buzzed. Another referral. Another company seeking refuge from consultants who'd forgotten that business is ultimately about people, not presentations. I poured myself a glass of wine, a good vintage I'd been saving for no particular occasion, and reviewed the expansion plans for Harbor Point. We were hiring carefully, building a team of refugees from corporate casualties, people who understood that being discarded by one company didn't diminish their worth. Some might call what I did revenge. They're not entirely wrong. But revenge implies anger, emotional decision-making, actions taken in the heat of betrayal. What I did was more calculated than that, more precise. I didn't destroy Mason and Ridge out of spite. I simply stopped propping them up. I took my expertise, my relationships, my understanding of what clients actually needed, and I put it somewhere it would be valued. If that happened to coincide with Travis's spectacular failure, well, that was just the market correcting itself. The last I heard, Travis was working for a startup that promised to revolutionize revolutionary thinking, whatever that means. His LinkedIn profile claims he's a serial entrepreneur, which I suppose is technically true if you count repeatedly failing upward as entrepreneurship. Richard Marks retired to Florida, where he presumably spends his days playing golf and wondering how everything went so wrong so fast. He sent me a letter once, 6 months after everything imploded. I didn't open it. Some conversations are better left unfinished. Janet, Jared, Sarah, Marcus, and the others who'd been cast aside in Travis's wake, they're all thriving now. Some with Harbor Point, others with companies that learned from Mason and Ridge's mistakes. We meet for drinks occasionally, not to rehash the past, but to celebrate the present we've built from its ashes. As for me, I'm exactly where I want to be. Not because I climbed the corporate ladder or played politics successfully or kissed the right asses at the right time. I'm here because I understood a fundamental truth that Travis, Richard, and so many others miss. Your real power isn't in your title or your corner office or your ability to fire people who threaten you. Your real power is in what you can build when they think they've destroyed you. They thought I needed them. Turns out, it was the other way around. The wine is excellent tonight, complex and full-bodied with just a hint of satisfaction. Outside my window, the city continues its endless churn of ambition and betrayal, triumph and failure. Somewhere out there, another Travis is probably plotting another coup. Another company is mistaking disruption for innovation. Another talented person is being shown the door by someone who fears their competence. To all of them, I raise my glass. To the discarded, the underestimated, the ones who refuse to accept that corporate betrayal is just how business works. Build something better. Take your expertise and your relationships and your hard-won knowledge and create something they can't steal, can't corrupt, can't diminish. They'll call it revenge. Let them. You'll be too busy succeeding to care. My phone buzzes again. Another client, another opportunity, another chance to prove that the best revenge isn't destroying those who wronged you. It's making their irrelevance obvious to everyone, including themselves. I set down my wine and open my laptop. There's work to do, a company to build, a future to create from the ashes of someone else's short-sighted greed. They thought firing me was the end of my story. It was just the beginning.